Hello and welcome back to our series Getting Started. My name is Gordon Dodderman. I'm from FTC Team 8372, and today we will be going over how to use control flow statements.
Okay, so the next most important thing in programming is what is called a control flow statement. So this includes multiple different statements such as if-else statements, while statements, for statements, and break statements. And all of these allow your program to either move around code or do code multiple times. And this allows you to have a lot more control over how your robot functions. So before we get into that, there's one thing that we need to cover really quickly, and that's called conditional. So a conditional is basically a sequence that evaluates out to be true or false. So this is like, does 1 equal 1? Is 3 less than 1? Stuff like that. So there are some operators that you can use to make sure that you are getting at what you need. So equal to is a double equal sign. Less than is a left caret. Less than or equal to is left caret equal sign. Greater than is right caret, and greater than or equal to is right caret equal sign. So finally, there's not equal to, which is exclamation point equal sign, which seems non-intuitive. However, that's just how it works. So some examples for this is like, is 1 greater than 1? No, it is not, so this would equate to false. And is 1 equal to 1? That equates to true. Now you can string some of these conditionals together with some operators such as and or. So these are pretty self-explanatory. The ampersand stands for and the double bar stands for or. The and operator evaluates the entire sequence as true only if both conditionals on either side of it are true. So 1 is not equal to 2, and 1 is greater than -1. So that would evaluate to true. However, if either of those statements were false, it would evaluate to false. On the other hand, the OR operator evaluates the sequence as true if either conditional is true or both are true. So only one has to be true for the entire thing to be true. So now that we've gone over what these conditionals are, it's time to go into what some statements are. So if-else statements are pretty straightforward. They are chains of conditionals that can activate different chunks of code. So you can imagine it just checking one after the other after the other. So is this true? No. Is this true? No. Is this true? No. So the first part of the if-else statement is the if statement. So it looks a little like if, and then in parentheses your conditional, so does 1 equal 1? And then the code you want to run if the conditional is true. So if the code inside the brackets will only run if the conditional is true, but after that it will break out of whatever you have after that. Now then, the next statement is what is called an else if. So these can only follow after an if statement and will only run the block of code if the conditional is true and no previous if or if else statements have been activated. So you can imagine the if and any following if else statements as a chain. As soon as one of them is activated, the chain is broken and none of the rest can be activated. Finally, there is the else statement that has to be at the end of the chain. This else statement will only activate if the chain was not previously broken. So if none of the other conditionals were true, this will just automatically activate and run the code regardless of any conditionals. So there can only ever be one else statement, and it must be at the end. It cannot be in the middle or the beginning. It has to be at the end, and there can only ever be one. So for example, you could have a if color is equal to red, it will go forward. Else if color is equal to blue, you shouldn't like move a servo, and else go backwards. So you can imagine this. The robot cannot go forwards, go backwards, and move a servo at the same time. It will only be doing one of those things depending on what the color sensor is sensing. So while loops are a bit of a different thing. Rather than running through it once and if the conditional is false, just skipping over it and never going back to it, while loops repeat a chunk of code until a conditional is false. So you say while the conditional, you run, and then the code you want to run. So let's say you have a tally-out program, and it's like while the out mode is active or while the program is running, just run this program. So this can be incredibly useful for just about anything and is really important. So an example would be like while the touch sensor is not pressed, go forward. So that would be like running into a wall or something like that. And then we have for loops, which are basically while loops but much more complex. So these are more like counting loops and will declare a variable, check a conditional, and change the variable each time it runs through. So you can declare like an integer like int counter equals 0. So that you can be your counter, and then as long as the counter is less than 5, it will run through the code. However, each time it runs through the code, it will add 1 to counter, allowing it to basically run a certain amount of times before it just automatically ends the loop. Finally, we have break statements. So break statements can be used to break directly out of any control flow statements, such as like a conditional just going false, or if you just don't want to evaluate the rest of an else if statement. So it's pretty basic. It's just break followed by a semicolon, but this is incredibly important if you want to break out of anything outside of a conditional.